Vladimir Putin. Yeltsin's PM in 1999, then Russia president from 2000 to 2008, Putin gained popularity by prosecuting Yeltsin's war on Chechnya, restoring economic and social stability and the power of the Russian state. He was also elected prime minister in 2008. Amnesty International, an influential non-governmental organization that operates globally to monitor and try to rectify glaring abuses of political human rights. Reagan Doctrine. U.S. would support freedom fighters trying to overthrow communist regimes, applied in Nicaragua, Angola, Cambodia and Afghanistan, opposed the influence of the Soviet Union by backing anti-communist guerrillas against the communist governments of Soviet-backed client states, somewhat triggered by Afghanistan aiding Mujahideen to hurt Soviets. SAL 2. Second Strategic Arms Limitations Talks. A second treaty was signed on June 18, 1977 to cut back the weaponry of the U.S. and the USSR because it was getting too competitive. He set limits on the numbers of weapons produced, not passed by the Senate as retaliation for USSR's invasion of Afghanistan, and later superseded by the START Treaty. Evil Empire Speech. In 1983, President Reagan made the blank, in which he claimed that the USSR was the evil of the world, also that there would be an inevitable failure and collapse of global communism. Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the USSR in 1985. He proposed major reforms and adopted policies of greater openness and allowed Soviet bloc states greater independence. In 1991, there was an unsuccessful attempted overthrow of his government. The USSR dissolved in 1991 with his resignation. Iranian Revolution of 1979. Opposition to the Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, grew from the brutality, inefficiency, malfeasance, and corruption of his regime. The Shah had exiled his main opponent, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and massive street demonstrations and crippling strikes against the existing government forces the Shah to leave the country in 1979. Glasnot. Policy of openness initiated by Gorbachev in the 1980s that provided increased opportunities for freedom. Perestroika. Gorbachev's policy of restructuring, which included reducing the direct involvement of the Communist Party leadership in the day-to-day governing of the nation. It was a decentralization of economic planning and controls. Marshal Tito. Yugoslavian dictator who broke with Stalin and developed his own form of communism, tried to bring Peace with the Serbs. After he died, Yugoslavia broke up, only independent communist state. Boris Yeltsin, Russian leader who stood up to a coup attempt in 1991 that would have displaced Gorbachev, first president of the Russian Republic following dissolution of Soviet Union. Chechnya, an autonomous republic in southwestern Russia and the northern Caucasus Mountains bordering on Georgia, ethnic republic that declared its independence in September 1991, against which Yeltsin launched a disastrous full-scale military attack in 1994 which led to the death of thousands of Ukraine, formerly the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, with its abundant natural resources and vast expanses of fertile soil, this country is still overly dependent on Russia, which has inhibited free market reforms. Site of Chernobyl nuclear disaster. August coup. Name given to the 1991 crisis, in which Gorbachev was kidnapped by his political opponents as part of an abortive attempt to seize power, accelerated the processes of national decay. Orange Revolution. This was a series of events using civil disobedience, general strikes, and protests in Ukraine in 2004 and 2005. During and after what revolution did Ukraine experience fair elections and a shifted focus toward Western Europe and the EU? Chernobyl. The nuclear power plant in the Ukraine that suffered two large explosions which released massive amounts of radioactive materials. It is the worst nuclear accident in history, and thousands were and continue to be impacted by the disaster. Kosovo, region of Yugoslavia that had autonomy until Milosevic attempted to crush the Albanian group with ethnic cleansing. 1999 NATO used military strikes against Yugoslavia until the crisis came to an end. In 1999, PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, formed in 1964 with the purpose of creating a homeland for Palestinians and Israel. Hamas, a militant Islamic fundamentalist political movement that opposes peace with Israel and uses terrorism as a weapon. Gulf War, a war that took place between Iraq and the U.S. Kuwait, started by Iraq invading Kuwait first. Non-containment-based war since World War II, often referred to as Operation Desert Storm, primarily an aerial war in the first stages, followed by an infantry march that pushed Iraqi forces back into Rwandan Genocide. The killing of more than 500,000 ethnic Tutsis by rival Hutu militias in Rwanda in 1994, the conflict between the dominant Tutsis and the majority Hutus had gone on for centuries, but the suddenness and savagery of the massacres caught the United Nations off guard. UN peacekeepers did not enter the country until after much of the damage had been done. Ethnic cleansing. Process in which more powerful ethnic group forcibly removes a less powerful one in order to create an ethnically homogeneous region. Darfur, western section of the country of Sudan, which has suffered civil war since 2003 and has had over 500,000 people killed and 21.5 million people displaced from their homes. The 11th of September, 2014 led to the beginning of the war against terrorism when Arab suicide bombers hijacked United States airliners and used them as bombs. George W. Bush, Republican president, neoconservative foreign policy dominated by war on terror, no child left behind, tax cuts, high deficits, major economic problems, proposed privatizing Social Security, opposed stem cell research, pro-life, carbon reductions, international law, but wanted more domestic drilling to alleviate oil dependence, major contributions to HIV, AIDS. George H. W. Bush, Republican, former director of CIA, oil company founder, owner, foreign policies, raised taxes even though said he wouldn't, more centrist than his son, NAFTA negotiation, called supply-side economics, VUE economics. Terrorism. The use of violence by non-governmental groups against civilians to achieve a political goal by instilling fear and frightening governments into changing policies. War on Terror. Initiated by President George W. Bush after the attacks of September 11, 2001, the broadly defined War on Terror aimed to weed out terrorist operatives and their supporters throughout the world. Al-Qaeda, a network of Islamic terrorist organizations led by Osama bin Laden that carried out the attacks on the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya in 1998, the US in Yemen in 2000, and the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. Arab Spring, term that was used beginning in March 2005 by numerous media commentators to suggest that a spin-off benefit of the invasion of Iraq be the flowering of Western-friendly Middle East democracies. The term took on a new meaning in 2011 as democratic uprisings independently arose and spread across the Arab world in Egypt, Tunisia, and Syria. Tony Blair, a political moderate who took leadership of the New Labour in the 1990s and eventually helped the Labour Party win in parliamentary elections in 1997, thus becoming Prime Minister, first Labour PM since 1979, continues in that position to the present day, though expected to step down as leader of the Labour Party in 2007. Ariel Sharon, former Israeli Prime Minister, mainly responsible in 2004 for the unilateral withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and the evacuation of Jewish settlements there. He visited Temple Mount in 2000, which made the Arabs very angry. He suffered a stroke in 2006 and has been in a vegetative state ever since. Weapons of mass destruction. Chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. These weapons are capable of destroying enormous numbers of people and vast areas, hence the name. Saddam Hussein has used these on the Iranian army during the Iran-Iraq War and on the Kurds in 1988. Osama bin Laden, Saudi Arabian multimillionaire and leader of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda. He is responsible for numerous terrorist attacks on the United States, including the destruction of the World Trade Center. Barack Obama called a hit on him and the Navy SEALs did him in 2011. Operation Just Cause. Invasion of Panama by the U.S. in '89, leader Noriega was deposed and RI sworn in. Bush cited that 1. The aim was to safeguard U.S. citizens, 2. Defend human rights and democracy, 3. Combat trafficking, 4. Protecting integrity of Torrijos Carter treaties.